Welcome back. I'm
Come
Justin
on.
Rogers, telling stories that shape Black lives around the world.
And I'm Joseph Vaughn, and I'm so excited to be with you all again today and with you, Justin. Looking fabulous down there in Texas. Can't wait till we get our feet back on the soil in Mama Africa. And I'm especially excited today that we're going to be discussing the significant economic shifts as emerging economies in Africa, Asia, and the Middle East begin to trade more with one another and develop broad, vibrant economies, and how that may expand to affect Europe, Asia, and consumers here in the United States.
Thank you, Joe. I'm so excited. Our trip is only about 2 weeks away. I think we're talking about a very important topic right now. The CD is now about 11 CDs for $1. What do you think these interregional trade agreements will bring to the future of Africa in terms of pegging the CD to the dollar or the value of the currency?
I think anytime an economy is developed, that creates opportunities to strengthen their currency. I think we'll see the dollar stabilize versus African currencies as those economies mature. This is a moment of transition and change globally. We see changes in U.S. foreign trade policy, U.S. foreign policy are affecting economies all over the world. And there's a lot of uncertainty and instability in this moment. But what I foresee over the long run is continued growth, continued stability. And I look forward to African Americans playing a part in that growth, developing those economies, and playing a role of consumers and creators in that process.
Thank you, Joe. Speaking of U.S. foreign policies, I'm sure you heard about these new tariffs being announced. How do you feel that the foreign policy of America will expedite these developing countries towards trading with one another and just cutting out America as the middleman?
I'm hopeful that America will not be cut out. Africa's growth over the last 20 to 30 years has benefited from direct investment through the United States, through U.S. corporations. I want to see that grow. It correlates to our being here in the United States, because anytime to develop products importing from Africa or exporting to the African diaspora, they need our intellectual strengths, abilities, assets to help them develop those products and to help them make inroads into those economies. More broadly, to the point of your question, right now, many foreign nations, global economies, and multinational corporations are beginning to rethink their foreign manufacturing, their business structure. In sub-Saharan Africa, there's a large pool of untapped human capital. There needs to be broad skill developments. But my hope is that as we think about the future of manufacturing, we see some of that manufacturing that's taking place in China, Asia, and other nations shift to Africa. You have a large populace of individuals who have the ability to learn, produce, grow, and be a part of the global economy. And I'm hopeful that as we overcome these uncertainties with global trade, it will result in new opportunities for the populations of sub-Saharan Africa.
How might you see countries like Ghana playing key roles into leading this move towards self-sufficiency?
Ghana, like many other African nations, has huge untapped potential. In preparing for today's dialogue, I was really excited to learn that in 2024, 9 of the world's 20 fastest growing global economies are in Africa. Niger, Senegal, Libya, Rwanda, Cote d'Ivoire. How is it that these nations had growth in GDP of 6% year over year in 2024? And as we come to 2025, I think that's why it's so frustrating to see how the uncertainty has evolved in the global economy, because when we see these African economies beginning to expand, develop products, and build bridges of opportunity and engagement with foreign companies, this process now has slowed that growth. I think it's likely we're going to see a reduction year over year in the economic growth of these nations. But at the end of the day, to your point, Ghana, like many of these nations, they are evolving in terms of their global presence, their manufacturing, their economic output. Well, let's be very clear what this means. It means empowerment for the citizens of these nations. When I think about this conversation and these issues and the potential of Ghana, it's really the potential of the people. One of the things we know when it comes to migration of populations, economic stability in these countries will reduce the need for individuals to migrate to other economies and other opportunities. When you look at what's happened with the populations that have immigrated to Europe over the last 5 years, populations that have immigrated from Latin America to the United States, These are populations that are seeking economic opportunity. And when we think about Ghana and these other nations, the economies of these nations represent, strengthening them to reduce the impetus for population shifts out of the diaspora to Western Europe and Europe.
I see. So essentially, what we're trying to do is provide Africa with the resources to build their own economies, to keep their citizens working their jobs in their countries versus the migration and losing the talent and the human capital for Ghana. I spoke with a Ghanaian friend of mine, and she was saying that Ghanaians, like many other countries in Africa and the Middle East and Asia, they all go to school in Europe or America, the United Kingdom, and then they might not ever come back home. And so there becomes this knowledge gap. My question is, while we're sitting here talking about trade and economies, what can Ghana do in Africa overall to retain knowledge from citizens who leave Africa to get educated? How does Africa attract them back to contribute to their growing economy?
This is a very important point. One of the impediments to economic growth is the lack of talent within the workforce. That is, you don't have a large pool of educated, talented business leaders to help with economic growth. My research has found that most of the students who leave Africa to go to Europe, to go to the United States to become educated, come from wealthy families. These are families of means. If you think about the long-term trajectory of the talent pool, what the governments of Africa have to do, they have to incentivize education, but also couple it with the expectation that the students are going to return to Africa to use those talents to help grow the economy. Just like in the United States, we have incentives like Teach for America or other programs that are designed to help shift talented students and educators and business leaders to geographic regions that are in need. I think governments of Ghana, Nigeria, and other emerging economies need to incentivize talented students to say, look, we're going to pay for you to go to the United States to get your secondary and post-secondary education with the understanding that we pay for your travel, we pay for your tuition, but we want you to commit 5 years post-graduate to come back to help us build our economy and spur investment in our countries. And I think that's a big piece of this because you have to break the cycle. For the first time, many of these African students are able to come to developed economies and see the robustness of those economies, the benefits of wealth investments, infrastructure, great housing, great restaurants, great schools, the ability to go to movies, shop, all those things that come with being in Europe, United States, Asia. I wouldn't want to deny any person access to those resources, but guess what? It's all the sweeter when you build it in Africa if folks are willing to invest.
I agree. And I think something that really is important to me and should be understood in terms of retaining talent is I'm not sure if Ghana or even African nations have small business administrations, but the education piece is powerful. What I fear could happen is you create these programs and they're meant to help lower income and impoverished people get access to education. I fear maybe the middle class and upper middle class would take advantage of these. In addition to that, I'm curious what it would look like to develop the business side, maybe helping low income farmers, low income single mothers, the beadmans on the side of the road or the roadside food sellers. How do you, because to me, I see business as another way of economic development. And so what kinds of programs or policies would you recommend to the Ghanaian government to help impoverish people create businesses and spur economic growth?
In America, as my mother always said to me when I was growing up, you are the company. And so I think one of the truths of surrounding yourself with intellectually gifted, educated people is that they rub off on you. Their knowledge, their work ethic, their vision, those things inspire you. When we start talking about the person who's got a small business selling beads, T-shirts, running a nail salon, these other businesses, they need to have understanding of macroeconomic and microeconomic policies, marketing, communications. When a talented student, an educated student comes back to the diaspora, they educate those who work around them. So while we can't develop strategies that are going to broadly educate everyone, your students come back and perhaps these are professors that you can use to invigorate and develop the curriculums at your domestic universities and education systems. The average age of the populace in sub-Saharan Africa is only 19 years old. 42% of that segment of the population is under the age of 15. There's a tremendous opportunity to bring a talented college graduate back for a short period of time to impact the next generation of talented thinkers who are going to bring some creativity and vibrancy back to the economy. But to your point around small business, and you mentioned the equivalent of a small business administration, one of the biggest impediments to African growth is the lack of clear regulatory structure, a lack of clear institutions designed to foment economic growth. One of the truths about the Small Business Administration, while there's been a lot of opposition to the Minority Business Development Agency at Commerce, a lot of opposition to the 7A and 8A programs offered by the Small Business Administration. We know that the economic growth, financial growth of African Americans in our community have benefited immensely over the last 50 years due to micro lending, crowdfunding, tools that are designed to provide capital and opportunity to businesses and those who have been historically left on the sidelines pre and post Community Reinvestment Act. I think it's interesting also when you think about what's happening in the debate with South Africa. We saw this week that the president of South Africa had an Oval Office visit that focused on the lies around a genocide in South Africa, missed the underlying strategic goal which they are trying to achieve, which is they want to see a greater diffusion of wealth throughout the populace, and they want to create economic opportunity. In any nation, legacy wealth is an impediment to that on some level because you see segments of the population who disproportionately control the wealth and are not willing, in many cases, to share that. So the point being, now is the time to invest, particularly in light of the declines in foreign direct investments. I was intrigued to learn that there was approximately $70 billion in foreign direct investments in Africa in 2021, immediately coming out of the COVID pandemic. We've seen that decline by 50% from 2021 to 2022 to only $38 billion, and it's declined even since then. One of the things that we need to begin thinking about is how do you create self-sufficiency? How do you invest in your own infrastructure, your own populace, and begin to develop these systems within your own economies? And that's really part of the challenge as we go forward. I think it's going to take a lot of Pan-African thought because at the end of the day, the challenges faced by Ghana are similar to the challenges faced by Niger, Rwanda, and other nations.
Speaking of Pan-Africanism, Joe, and the whole embodiment of that movement, once we get to Ghana, we are definitely taking a trip out to Elmina, Cape Coast, because we have to visit the castle, the Door of No Return. I've been doing some research and I came across this Pan-African village in Asebu, which is a little north of Cape Coast. It's near Elmina, all along the coast. But this town, this village, might I say, they have about 5,000 acres of raw virgin land that's never been touched. Some of that land has been taken from local African tribes and families. My question is, how do you feel like Black repatriatism could help the African economy, particularly in Ghana?
Well, economies of scale comes from micro and macro investments, which have a ripple effect across the broader economy. While the lands may have been sacrificed by certain tribes, either by agreement or eminent domain, what comes from the development of that land and the repatriation of African Americans is the ripple effect that their investments in wealth will have across the Ghanaian economy. Who's going to build the land? Where are the resources to build the infrastructure, to build the homes? Who are the artisans, the carpenters, the electricians, the construction companies? You talk about the economic impact, and as those companies and individuals benefit from participating in those projects, they're able to provide a better quality of life for their children and family. They shop at vendors and stores in their respective communities. So it has this ripple effect in America, and credit to the Jewish community around how they're able to recycle and pass through wealth through many institutions. The dollar passes through up to 15 different institutions in their economy and their communities before the dollar. And conversely, the dollar doesn't recirculate in the African American communities because we tend not to support one another. So the question becomes, when you think about this sort of repatriation and the investment, what does it mean for Africa? This is why Ghana is trying to incentivize and catalyze the return, repatriation of African Americans to Ghana. The wealth they bring has this residual impact across the economy and will help elevate the economy in many ways. So when I think about the potential, this is the role and the benefit that our understanding can have. Let's be very clear. We talked about the benefits and the amenities and the quality of life that so many pursue in Europe and the United States. At the end of the day, for us who may repatriate back to Africa, we need to recognize that the lack of robust infrastructure is a quality of life issue. But at the end of the day, that's part of the sacrifice we make through our fundamental belief in Pan-Africanism. If it is for us to build, it's up to us to build and contribute. And so are there going to be sacrifices? Absolutely. But what is the long-term benefit? It is that our families, our children, and our children's children will see a more vibrant and robust Africa. I mentioned infrastructure, and I think there's a lot of things that go into that word, and that is we think of it as the roads, the sewers, and schools, but we also need investment in the digital infrastructure. One of the biggest impediments to economic growth and opportunity is a lack of a robust telco network, the inability to leverage Wi-Fi across the country. You go through dead spots, you have time of the day because of the load on the networks and the lack of throughput. You may have 10,000 Ghanaians returning home from work and they're all in their homes and neighborhoods, but the infrastructure is not able to support them in the early evenings accessing these tools. When you start talking about business development, research, and education, it's fundamental to economic opportunity. This is also part of the infrastructure that needs to be developed, and it's a part of the impediment that impacting the ability of African nations to work cohesively to find solutions to common challenges through trade and mutual support.
And when you talk about infrastructure, as an American, we have such developed infrastructure. It makes getting around so convenient. I can easily get on the freeway. I can easily get on the street. No really bumpy roads, no heavy ruts in the road. I feel like I'm very blessed, and it's obviously a convenience for us. Something that might hold a few Black Americans back from wanting to go places like Africa or Ghana are these inconveniences and challenges we might face because we are American and we're so used to pulling out the Uber, the DoorDash. We're so used to quickly doing anything via our phone. I'm a little concerned that there could be this rhetoric in this wave of Black Americans who move to Ghana and then go and say negative things and create this sort of anti-year of return wave because they go and say, oh, it wasn't what you guys said. It wasn't what you sold. You scammed us out of our money, whatever. But what I want to ask you is, what should we as Black Americans be going into Africa? What should our mindset look like? What should we be thinking? What should we not be thinking? How do we challenge our own beliefs?
For the most part, any community in this country have great schools that are accessible, the quality of education, library systems, colleges, universities. We are blessed in that as we look at our existence here in the United States, we've had a great quality of life. We live in a great society. But at the end of the day, when it comes to our morals, our ethos, our sense of purpose, what is it that we want to accomplish? And I think that has to be the guiding beacon for us as we consider Africa. Pan-Africanism is this belief that is up to the African states to work cohesively to build a more perfect African Union, to help the broader economies across the continent. We have a role to play in that process. To me, you have to be guided by something greater. I know that we're going to have to make sacrifices in this process. Look, I talked about the lack of digital infrastructure. It's something that we have to get accustomed to. We have no problem riding through the Caribbean to resorts and going through neighborhoods that are destitute and look out the bus window and say, I'm glad that's not me. And then you get to the resort, lay on the beach at cocktails, enjoy yourself and ride back to the airport without a second thought and fly back home. And is that morally reprehensible? In my view, it is on some level. So what are we going to do to assist those economies? I think at the end of the day, I'm taught by my pastor, Reverend Dexter Nuttall, it is a blessing to be a blessing. Our contributions, even if it's only for 24 months, 36 months, or 48 months, let's say you make a commitment for 2 years. The time you spend in that 2 years is a blessing to the African nations and to the populace to share thoughts, to share ideas. I think the one thing that is unacceptable is dealing with corruption. The corruption piece, which in some cases is systemic, must be addressed, because we should have an expectation that if we are going to go to Ghana to invest, we are not going to be gouged. We're not going to have to pay bribes. We should have an expectation that as we're engaging with elected leaders, government officials, and governmental systems in these nations, they have adopted and implemented a legal infrastructure consistent with international norms of law. And let's be clear, if you're running a small business, the United States has very clear laws governing the actions of companies as they go into foreign economies, that they can't pay bribes. So when I think about the sacrifices that we may have to make, I think riding on bumpy roads or dealing with blackouts potentially, leveraging water from a cistern versus having a robust plumbing system, these are parts of living in developing nations. And we make that sacrifice. But my thought is, it is a blessing to be a blessing, and being a blessing in many cases may require us to think less of ourselves and to sacrifice some of those amenities that we become so used to as Americans.
I like that. I personally feel like something that will help bring in this new wave of Black repatriates to Africa is cultural exchange. And I say that because I have lived outside the country, lived in the Middle East, and you just have to go into these places with an open mind. We are definitely talking to a certain kind of audience. We cannot sit here and neglect, and I hate to say it, but we are really talking to the everyday Black person. We're talking to middle class, maybe upper middle class, educated Black people who even know where Ghana is on the map. So we have to sit here and understand that although I'm my brother's keeper and I want to help every brother out there, I feel like as a community, Black people are not ready. I feel like for us to not get there and be so discouraged or feel these challenges, we have to have cultural competency. And it's just being aware. It's just Googling, it's searching, but it's also having that keen curiosity of wanting to know more, being accepting. When you talk about being a blessing for others, I truly feel that when I am in these places and I just randomly run across maybe a little kid on the street or a local man and we start talking, I always feel that these interactions I have when I'm abroad and with people are from God. And I can't explain it, but I always get something out of the conversation. And I know the other person always does too. I feel like we need to have this attitude where it is more of a collaboration. I was researching a Cebu village, which is a Pan-African village. They have this diaspora queen. She's Black and from Atlanta, Georgia. They crowned her diaspora queen. Now, I think it can be a little problematic to have this sort of chiefdom for Black repatriates, and they're working with the chiefdom of the local people. But my question that I want to ask and get your insight on is, do you think there would need to be some kind of coalition or governing body of African Americans to facilitate this ambassadorship between the diaspora and the local people?
As I answer that question, let me focus on a few different things. First of all, we talked about cultural exchange. And the first premise of a cultural exchange is one has to immerse themselves in the culture of the society into which you hope to repatriate and become a part of. If having a chieftain is consistent culturally with the broader African diaspora, then I bless that infrastructure. The question becomes, is it a ceremonial relationship we would have with that chief, or are we looking to that person as a community leader to help our community assimilate into the broader cultural tapestry, gain access into the government infrastructure, and ease the transition into those countries, that culture, the way of life? I'm hopeful that you can achieve that element. But to your point with respect to a lot of people in our culture not being ready to consider or make this type of move, one thing I would point to is, I don't know how you feel, but I'm going to be very honest. I feel, and I think I can point to any number of tangible and intangible ways that we are being persecuted. Our existence is persecuted. Our history is under persecution. Think about the fact that this spring, the Trump administration has told college campuses across this country, you cannot have graduation ceremonies for affinity groups as an official part of your spring commencement ceremony. So African-American students in Kentucky, at Harvard, They're now left in a position where they want to celebrate their traditions through their graduation, whether it's wearing king cloth or having a commencement speaker that speaks to the cultural and goals of your community. Why can't we have that? Why do we have the federal government telling the Museum of African American History and Culture what exhibits they can show? Why do we have to have slavery being redefined as involuntary relocation versus what it is? Brutal chattel slavery. So why do we have to have police officers who on average kill one Black person a day in this country? If you do the math over a year's time, more than 1,000 people are killed by police. I'm not questioning whether those shootings are justified, but you wouldn't see that type of reality in London, England, or any other modern industrialized nation, that the police use of violence is so prevalent. And we're so desensitized to it that we ignore when police officers who brutalize people on camera are found not guilty or hide behind qualified immunity. There's a broader opportunity culturally for us to have an existence that's not one under the scrutiny of persecution, whether it's through implicit bias or explicit bias in the workplace or an open hostility to our very existence in the political discourse. When was the last time you heard any Republican mention critical race theory? Where did critical race theory come from? It follows a long history of our existence being used as a catalyst to animate white voters to support the conservative candidate. It's no different than Ronald Reagan with the welfare queen. It's no different than Willie Horton and George W. Bush. It's no different than Sister Soldier with Bill Clinton. You can see a continuum over the last 40 years that every presidential election, in some way, some fashion, we are reminded and voters are reminded that African Americans, those Black people, they're doing something. Think about the absurd things that were said about Barack Obama and Michelle Obama. Marxist, Leninist, Michelle Obama appearing on the cover of a magazine in fatigues and with a weapon. This is the reality in which we exist in this country. Let's stop pretending this opportunity just exists in Africa. There are a lot of African Americans moving to Costa Rica and Latin America, the Caribbean, Thailand, and other places. They are seeking a better quality of life, free of that legacy of persecution. The reality is it's within our reach. If we can conceptualize it, if we can get on that plane, there's so much potential benefit. And if not for us, for our children and our children's children. And I want my children to know that there's a possibility in their future to pursue a similar pathway to their ancestral roots.
And let the church say amen.
Amen.
The legacy of persecution, I really do have to talk on that for a second, because I had never seen my existence as a Black man as that phrase, literally legacy of persecution. But I will say, you put it so perfectly. We were by the United States troopers the other day, and all of these occurrences I have had in this white Trump American world. I don't know if it's because I've talked to you. I don't know if it's because I've become more aware, but I question myself all the time, like, why does someone treat me like this because I am a Black man? I get upset. I get in my feelings because I just cannot fathom, like, why are you so rude to me? Why do you not acknowledge my presence? It makes me start questioning myself and my identity as a Black man, which is why I am so ready to get out of a country where white people are the mode of standard. I am so ready to go to Africa where I don't have to worry about police stopping me because they're racially profiling me. I don't have to worry about
Look,
a shopkeeper. I've become a lot more aware and acute to these. They're not microaggressions, they're macroaggressions. And I don't even think people realize that, but I've become very acute to them these past few weeks, and it just pushes me further and further away from America.
The thing that we can never forget is that in America, we are culturally conditioned that white is superior and Black is inferior. The imagery of our people has been ingrained into the consciousness that we are lazy. Let's never forget that Donald Trump said that laziness is a trait that's inherent in Black people. That's the President of the United States' belief and view of our community in America. The cultural conditioning is that we have internalized and believe it Think about it. Because we've done this for so long, our parents have conditioned us to believe that we have to be superior in our education, superior in all facets of our execution of our professional lives. We accept that we have to work harder to achieve less. There's expectations that we have to be almost perfect in our execution if we are going to be successful. Is that fair? No, but it's the reality in which we live. We've accepted that on some level when we're accused of crimes. I think it's interesting that the RICO statutes they're using to try to convict them on have only been used against Bar Kelly. And Jeffrey Epstein wasn't charged with any RICO statute violations. The fact of the matter is, if we look at our nation's history, post-slavery, Jim Crow, some of these sentiments are ingrained into the institutions of the country. This week, one of the subcommittees on the Education and Workforce Committee had a hearing to look at DEI in education in the United States of America. And there was a brilliant brother from South University of Southern California. Dr. Harper was a witness. Go online and look at his presentation during that hearing. He was dispelling the notion, dispelling the myths, dispelling the fallacies. When he talked about, because let's think about what we're here, when we talk about DEI and college enrollment, the perception being perpetrated is that somehow underqualified African Americans are getting an opportunity to attend elite universities at the expense of white and Asian students. Yeah, the graduation rates of African Americans at Harvard, at the elite Ivy League institutions, are 95%. They're taking the same exams, going through the rigorous curriculums like every other student, and graduating at 95%. Does that suggest that the folks are unqualified to be there? It does not. What it reinforces is that standardized test scores can't be the sole litmus test for acceptance into college and universities. You have to look deeper at a person's existence, their cultural heritage, their communities. There's so much more that goes into the makeup of a person and what they can potentially contribute to the educational environment, to the vibrancy of these institutions. When you think about it, I'll give a perfect example. A lot of African Americans play sports, but there are also a lot of African Americans who play musical instruments. They may be into poetry. They may be into art. They bring a lot of skills to the table, which universities want to tap into, which help make the educational environment more vibrant. So as we consider these issues and we think about this idea of the legacy of persecution and how we have almost internalized it to the point where we almost ignore it, well, when we see it in our face every day, we have to continue to overcome those lies. We're going to continue to call out those lies and the hypocrisy everywhere we see it. It's really interesting and telling that when President Ramaphosa was in the Oval Office with President Trump accused the president of South Africa of not addressing genocide of white farmers. President used imagery from the Democratic Republic of the Congo, where there is an ongoing genocide. Just think about the contrast of that. He's accusing the president of South Africa of not addressing genocide of white farmers by using photos and videos and imagery, folks in the Congo who are experiencing genocide, and yet his focus is on creating a pathway for white South African refugees to come to America and completely ignoring what's going on in Sudan and the Congo. Where is your moral beacon? And where's the righteousness in that hypocrisy?
The one pressing question I have for life, which I don't think can ever be answered, is why does the world hate me so much as a Black man? That is what I think every day as I navigate through the world. I almost can't even put it into words. Having started reading Du Bois's book, The Double Consciousness, but also reading Ta-Nehisi Coates' Between the World and Me, which is the book where he writes it like a letter from a father to a son. It is very moving, and there's not words I could really put on a camera or a podcast for people to understand. But it is truly this double consciousness. I walk in my local grocery store where I am the only Black man in this space, and then I immediately become aware of how people are perceiving me. And I'm just tired of that. I'm tired of having the thoughts.
You're tired of it? Just think about this. Those books are likely on the banned book list across the United States of America. And I'll ask you why. What is it about that knowledge and that understanding and that thought that you are not supposed to read, see, and consider as you develop your worldview. I want to say this to you, but also to all of our people who may be listening and viewing, who may be feeling a sense of persecution. One of the things I love about being in a church is, as they say, be ye not dismayed. Faith is part of this conversation. As we think about our coping mechanisms, we code switch, and that double consciousness drives us to excel. Our story is a story of triumph because no matter what they have said, no matter what they have done, no matter the legacy of colonization, the legacy of slavery, the legacy of miseducation of the Negro, quote another book that may be on the banned book list across this country, yet we rise. We are Phoenix, brother, we're strong. I'm not scared of anything you're going to say and do to me. And your view of me is a reflection of you, not a reflection of me. It becomes a reflection of me if I acknowledge it, internalize it, and have it affect my ability to eat and thrive. I'm not going to allow you, your view of me and your view of Africa to shape my thinking. I have the right to self-determination, and Africa has the right to self-determination. We have to break the cycles of poverty that have kept economic development opportunity there diminished. And that's what this process and this dialogue, the entire level of thinking around these economies is about.
For me, Joe, like when you were talking about that experience, I got it. Like it came to me. It's still, no matter, I've never given a chance. I literally never had or will have a chance in America. And that's what I'm getting at. I don't care how accoladed I am, how educated I am, how nice the clothes I have on. I've never given a chance. The second you see I'm a Black man, I noticed that. And so it just makes me very upset because it was like, yo, I was never even given a chance. And I don't think white people ever see it like that. But it's, imagine you walk in a room and you are more qualified than anyone in that room, and someone looks at you and sees you're a Black man and they're like, oh, no, I've never given a chance. And to me, that's very discouraging. Of course, I can self-motivate myself, and I am very encouraging to myself, but it's very hard. And I understand how it's very hard for other brothers and Black men out there. I work 4 times as hard to get 0.5 of what you get. And I still never had the chance.
One thing I'm going to say is this, and I am a champion of diversity, equity, inclusion, because what diversity, equity, inclusion can achieve is a higher level of thought to understand the cultural bias that we all bring to the conversation. I grew up in upstate New York. When I grew up in New York, I have a cultural bias when I hear a Southern accent, a Southern drawl, that they say that, I think, oh, that person, she don't understand their country. They don't know what's going on. We bring these biases to the table. In this context, we're talking about limitations of opportunity for African Americans and the divisive stereotypes latent in the thinking of too many people in our society. But the reality is there are pathways to overcome that. I'm going to tell you, I think the backlash to Donald Trump, that story is being written. And I'm confident that come 2028, 2030, we are going to evolve as a culture in a way it could have never envisioned. Folks see the hypocrisy in the arguments that are being made against folks based on cultural stereotypes, racial stereotypes. Interestingly, white rural communities are more closely aligned to our experience, our existence, that of our community, than they are to the Elon Musks of the world. Their desire to achieve economic opportunity, success, great employment, investment in their communities is very similar to what we experience as a community. Look, there may not be a bank branch in my community, but there's sure a hell of a lot more bank branches in my proximity than there are in rural Kentucky. I think education is critical. I believe in diversity, equity, inclusion because it fosters thinking that forces us to imagine and understand the impact of our actions. Me as a man working in close proximity to a woman, how are my body language, my actions, my behaviors, how could they impact a woman around me? If I'm taking a group of colleagues out to happy hour and I go to a cigar bar, what does that mean? Do I need to think about how that may impact someone else in the group? Did we go to a place that's compliant where a person with disabilities would be able to access the space if they decide to come with us? If I choose a place that's an impediment to a person with a disability, what does that mean? Am I discriminating against that person? If it's not wheelchair accessible, I'm discriminating. If I take a group of my colleagues to a professional football game and I choose seats in a section where it's only accessible by climbing stairs and the person is in the wheel, should I be thinking about choosing spaces that
Mm.
accommodate those around me? I have a lot to learn. We all have a lot to learn and to evolve in our thinking. I'm optimistic that this moment will empower us to get to God's greater. And that is recognition and support for our brethren, whether they know it and understand it today or not.
The future is bright, Joe. We can talk forever.
One thing we didn't talk about is the African and the trade zone they're trying to build, because one of the critical things about that process is this. On the continent of Africa, only 18% of the trade in Africa is intra-regional trade. And you juxtapose that to 60% of the trade in Asia is intra-regional. That is Asian countries trading with other Asian countries. In Europe, it's 69%.
Mm.
Part of what we see as the empowerment pieces to support efforts at Pan-Africanism through economic engagement. A lot of that has to do with investments. We talked about some of the investments in the digital infrastructure, but one of the other costs from the lack of robust physical infrastructure is the cost associated. Time is money. And you can imagine every hour that a truck is on the highway transitioning from South Africa to Nigeria to Ghana has a cost to it. There's a potential risk to it that slows down economic growth and opportunity. One of the things we love about Amazon is that I can snap my fingers and have something in front of my house within 24 hours at minimal cost. That efficiency creates economic benefit and opportunity to both the producer, the seller, and the consumer. So much goes into this idea of how we foment greater intra-regional trade. If these nations can produce products that can be sold in America, they can produce products that can be sold on the continent. If Lesotho can make denim jeans that Levi's is going to sell in the United States, they can make clothing that can be sold in Ghana and Nigeria at cheaper costs and help clothe the people. We've got to begin thinking about that piece of this Pan-African conversation as well. And so I think that's also a critical element of this conversation that we must address.
I agree, Joe. I definitely think engaging with Pan-Africanism, we can give back more to the continent, but we can start to understand how our heritage as people of the diaspora plays into the overall re-emergence of Africa. Africa is not emerging, it is re-emerging after being suppressed or oppressed by the West.
We sit in positions of authority, power, and influence in the C-suites of corporations across this country. One of the things they talked about is the lack of understanding of consumers in the African diaspora, that Western business leaders lack a fundamental understanding of the needs, wants, and ability of consumers in Africa to purchase products. As we sit in those seats of power, I have a great friend who is very senior at UPS. Part of what we're talking about is repatriation. When we think about the African diaspora and the ways we can invest, maybe it's us envisioning opportunities for the corporations we work for to profit and benefit from economic expansion into those markets. Maybe it's conceptualizing how those brands and services can expand and be marketed in Africa. So if you work for a McDonald's, if you work for, just name the corporation, maybe what you can be saying to your corporate leadership, look, I've done the analysis. And guess what? If they don't share your vision, build it, create it, be an entrepreneur, think entrepreneurially, wear two hats at the same time, work all day and think about this vision at night, because these are ways that we can contribute to this process. So I know we're wrapping. I can't wait for the next edition of this dialogue, because Justin, you know where we're going to be the next time we shoot? We are going to be on Labadi Beach in Accra, Ghana, under the sunshine and the clouds, looking out on 15,000 Africans. And we're going to be talking about our experience there on the beaches of Ghana, on the soil of Mama Africa. I'm so excited to see your face, shake your hand, and give you a hug, brother. Let's bring these ideas to fruition and bring it to our listeners and the people so they can see what has us so animated, so hopeful, so passionate about this process.
I'm with you, Joe. The church choir is singing and screaming and saying amen.
Happy Saturday, brother. I love you. I'm so excited about this dialogue with you. There's so much research and work to be done. Perhaps when we start talking in Africa, we can then talk about the execution of those other entrepreneurial pieces, which we discussed in our last segment. Let's talk about the next
Mhm.
piece of it, what we're going to be doing. Maybe we're going to shoot all over our crowd. We're going to different places. We're going to have a production team, and we're going to have a lot of information and knowledge and visuals to share with our audience.
Yes, Joe. But as always, Joe and I, we both want to welcome the audience and thank you all for tuning into the Black Narratives, where we share insights on Black stories around the world. Thank you.
Peace and blessings to everyone.